My name is Evelyn Grant, and at 66 I thought I had learned how to read silence. Yet nothing prepared me for the silence that followed the text I received that evening. I was standing in my kitchen, the smell of rosemary clinging to my hands as I worked the marinade into a whole chicken. The sound of my phone cut through the stillness sharp and cold against the hum of the refrigerator. I wiped my palms on a towel, reached for the screen, and froze. It was from Madison, my daughter-in-law. Just 2 lines. "Don't come tonight. You're not wanted here." For a moment, I stared at those words as if they belonged to someone else's life, not mine, not after everything I had done helping my son, Daniel, and Madison secure the down payment on their house covering hospital bills, when little Emma was born, even slipping grocery cards into their mailbox when times were tight. My entire retirement savings had been stretched thin by love, by duty, by the belief that family meant sacrifice. And now with the press of a thumb, I was erased from the table I had helped build. I didn't shout. I didn't call. I set the phone down the screen, glowing with its cruel simplicity. My heart should have raced, but instead it slowed, steady and cold. The kind of calm you feel when the truth is too sharp to ignore. I walked to the desk in the corner of my living room and opened the black leather ledger I had kept for years. Every entry was there: the stroller, the mortgage payments, the endless small rescues, 150 acts of love that had turned invisible. My eyes burned, but no tears fell. Instead, a thought settled in me, heavier than grief, clearer than anger. If they no longer wanted me at their table, then they would no longer have me as their safety net. That night, as the chicken sat untouched on the counter, I realized this wasn't the start of a petty quarrel. This was the end of an illusion I had clung to for far too long. 3 months before that message shattered my evening, I had driven across town with a basket balanced on the passenger seat. Inside were containers of chicken soup, a loaf of fresh bread, and a pack of diapers I'd picked up on sale. It was late spring in Oregon, the kind of evening when the air still carried a chill, even though the trees had already filled out with leaves. I remember humming along to the radio, feeling quietly pleased that I could still be useful, that my visits meant something. When I pulled into their driveway, the lights in the living room glowed warm against the dusky sky. I knocked gently, expecting to hear Daniel's footsteps or Emma's babbling. Instead, Madison opened the door phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharper than usual, not the sugary tone she used in front of me. "She's here again," she said into the phone, not bothering to lower her voice, always looking for excuses to show up. The words were meant for someone else, but they landed squarely on me. Her Bluetooth speaker on the table carried the sound loud enough to erase any pretense. My chest tightened, as if the cold air had followed me inside. She turned, then her smile, a brittle mask, stretched too thin across her face. "Oh, Evelyn, that's so kind of you again," she said, reaching for the basket. I handed it over without a word, nodding once, before stepping back into the twilight. The soup was still warm against my palm where I had held the container, but inside I felt only the first stirrings of frost. That night, lying awake, I thought of Daniel, my gentle boy who used to call every weekend just to tell me about his week. Now those calls had grown fewer, shorter, as if someone else's hand was slowly lowering the volume. It was the first time I wondered if my presence had become an intrusion, but wondering didn't stop me from giving. Not yet. A week after that night at their doorstep, I found myself sitting at my desk long after the sun had slipped below the horizon. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that magnifies every small sound, the creak of the chair, the rustle of paper. I pulled open the drawer where I kept a black leather-bound ledger, its cover worn smooth from years of handling. I had started it out of habit, the same way I once balanced household budgets when Daniel was a boy. Every check I had written, every online transfer, every bill I had covered meticulously logged. I thought of it as a record of love, proof that I was doing my part to steady his new family. Flipping through the pages that night, I noticed the neat columns had turned into a history I could no longer ignore. $200 for groceries, $1,200 for the car repair, $5,000 for their wedding reception. Then the down payment on the house, the one with the wide porch I had only sat on twice. Line after line, month after month, until the ink itself seemed to whisper back at me, "You've given enough." My hand lingered over the last entry, Emma's hospital bill. I remembered holding her for the first time, her tiny fingers curling around mine, believing that all the sacrifices had been worth it. But now, with Madison's words echoing, always looking for excuses to show up, those numbers no longer looked like love. They looked like transactions. I closed the book, pressing my palm against its cover as if to steady myself. For the first time, I questioned not just their gratitude, but my own fear of being forgotten. Had I kept giving because I was afraid of being invisible in their lives? The ledger stayed on the desk, silent but heavy. I knew then that one day soon I would have to stop writing in it. The decision came quietly, not with a burst of anger, but with a stillness that felt almost foreign. One Saturday morning, I logged into my bank account and paused the automatic transfer that covered a portion of Daniel's mortgage. My finger hovered for a moment over the confirmation button, then pressed down. A simple click, yet it felt like cutting a rope that had bound me for years. Next came the grocery card I had kept reloading for them, a safety net I never admitted aloud. I let the balance expire. Then the shared streaming accounts, Netflix, Amazon, even the password to the music app Daniel loved. One by one, I changed them, erasing my name from the corners of their lives where it had been taken for granted. The silence was immediate. No thank you notes, no frantic calls at first, just an empty stretch of days where my phone lay still on the counter. I almost convinced myself they hadn't noticed. But on the third day, the messages began. Mom did something happen with the rent transfer. Daniel's tone was polite, uncertain. Evelyn, the grocery card, was declined. Can you check Madison's words carried none of the sugar she used around others? By the fifth day, my phone lit up with 66 missed calls from Daniel. He left voicemails, his voice strained, almost panicked, but never once asking how I was or if I was okay. Always about the money. I listened to one message, then deleted it. My silence had become louder than any argument. Each evening I would sit by the window watching the sun drop behind the fir trees, letting the quiet wash over me. For the first time in years, the absence of their demands didn't feel lonely. It felt like breathing. By the end of that week, I knew silence alone wasn't enough. They could ignore my absence, dismiss it as stubbornness, or wait me out until guilt dragged me back. I needed something that couldn't be twisted or denied. I pulled out a red folder from the cabinet where I kept household papers. Its color was deliberate, bright, impossible to overlook, the kind I used years ago to organize Daniel's school forms and medical records. I spread the ledger across the desk and began copying line after line into a typed statement. Down payments, hospital bills, groceries, insurance, weddings. Every major expense they had leaned on me for stacked neatly on 6 pages. At the top, I wrote a note in my own hand. Over the past years, I have supported you not as debt, but as love. I never asked for repayment. I only expected respect. That respect has been taken from me. You now have your own home, your own family. This is me stepping back. Consider the attached records not as bills, but as lessons. Love is not endless when it is treated as currency. I will no longer fund my own disrespect. I read the letter twice, steadying my hand as I signed my name. Then I slipped the papers into the red folder, closed the clasp, and drove across town. The neighborhood was quiet when I pulled into their driveway. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't wait for explanations or tears. I slid the folder into their mailbox and walked away. By the time I reached my front door, my phone was already buzzing with calls. I let it ring until it fell silent. That night, I sat alone with a cup of tea, the folder no longer in my hands, but the weight of it finally lifted from my chest. Daniel's birthday came in early summer, and though I hadn't been invited, word of the party traveled quickly. A neighbor mentioned the cars lining the street outside his house, the laughter spilling into the warm night air. I tried to busy myself at home cooking a small dinner, pretending it was just another evening. But when the phone stayed silent when no invitation arrived, the ache settled deeper than I wanted to admit. Later, I learned how the truth unraveled. The backyard was strung with lights tables, crowded with friends and coworkers. Music played softly, glasses clinked, and Daniel moved from guest to guest, his smile a little too forced. Madison hovered nearby, making sure everything appeared flawless. It was during dessert that someone asked the question, casual and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, Daniel, is your mom coming later?" The air shifted. Madison stiffened her hand, tightening around her glass. Daniel hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't come. "She couldn't make it," he muttered. But one of Daniel's oldest friends, a man who had known him since high school, didn't let the silence hold. "That's not true," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "She wasn't invited. Everyone knows it." The laughter faltered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, and a few quietly set down their plates. One woman even returned the gift she had brought, slipping it back into her purse before leaving. By the end of the night, the backyard was nearly empty, the glow of the string lights casting more shadows than warmth. I wasn't there to see it, but I imagined Madison's face, the brittle mask cracking under the weight of exposed truth. And Daniel standing beside her, realizing that silence could humiliate louder than any shout. At home, I poured myself a glass of water and let the quiet settle. Their party had ended in whispers, and for once I hadn't lifted a finger. 2 days after the party, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting on the envelope made my breath catch. It was Daniel's, uneven and hurried the same loops and slants I had recognized since his grade school assignments. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for a long moment before tearing it open. "Mom," it began, "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of this." The words blurred for a moment as my eyes filled, though no tears fell. He wrote of fear of how he let Madison take the lead because he was terrified of conflict. He admitted that somewhere along the way he stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me only as help. He confessed he had been ashamed to stand up to her, ashamed to admit he was still leaning on me when he should have been strong enough on his own. "I want to try again," the letter ended. "Not with money, not with gifts. Just me, your son. If there's still a chance." I folded the paper, slowly pressing the creases flat with my fingers. My mind slipped back to another letter years ago. Daniel at 8 years old scribbling, "I love you, Mom," on a crooked birthday card drawn with crayon. That boy had once promised he would always take care of me when he grew up. Now the man he had become was asking me to take care of his dignity. I wanted to believe him. Part of me ached to. But another part, the one that had lived through years of being reduced to a safety net, knew better than to hand forgiveness out like spare change. That night, I placed his letter in the drawer beside my ledger. 2 records side by side, one of numbers, one of words. Neither erased the other. Both demanded I decide how much of myself I was still willing to give. It was just after dawn when the knock came. I was still in my robe, cradling a mug of coffee, the house quiet except for the ticking clock in the hallway. At first, I thought it was a delivery. But when I opened the door, there stood Daniel, hair unkempt, eyes hollow from lack of sleep, with baby Emma pressed against his shoulder. There was no Madison. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't know where else to go. Emma's small hand reached out toward me, her cheeks flushed from crying. My heart ached at the sight of them, but my guard stayed firm. I stepped aside silently, motioning them in. Daniel carried her to the living room, lowering himself onto the couch, as if the weight of his own body was too much to hold. "She left," he said finally. "Packed a suitcase last night and walked out. Said she was staying with her sister. Said I needed to figure out who I was loyal to." His eyes flicked up to mine, desperate searching. "And have you?" I asked, my voice steady. He swallowed hard. I thought I was keeping peace with her, but the more I tried, the more pieces of myself I lost. And I lost you, too. Emma fussed, her little cries cutting through the room. I reached for her and Daniel handed her over without hesitation. She settled against me, her warmth pressing into my chest, the faint scent of baby lotion rising from her hair. For a moment, I closed my eyes, breathing her in, letting the memory of holding Daniel as a child wash over me. Maybe it wasn't about punishing him anymore. Maybe it was about watching whether he could earn his way back. That morning, with Emma asleep in my arms, I realized forgiveness could wait. Boundaries could not. A few days later, Daniel returned. In the late afternoon, Emma balanced on one hip and a small cardboard box tucked under his arm. His face was pale, drawn tight, as if he had aged years since that morning he first showed up at my door. He set the box on my dining table, sliding it toward me with trembling hands. "I found this after she left," he said quietly. Inside were printed copies of emails and text messages, most between Madison and her sister. I lifted one page, my eyes catching on the words that sliced sharper than any knife. "I can't stand that woman. She acts like we owe her something. Once the mortgage is paid off, we won't need her anymore. If Evelyn thinks she can control our lives just because she paid a few bills, she's dumber than she looks." My breath caught. The letters on the page blurred as heat rose behind my eyes. I laid the paper down carefully as though it might burn me. Daniel stood across from me, shame written in every line of his posture. I had no idea he whispered. His voice cracked, raw and small. I closed the box slowly, pressing the lid down with steady fingers, though my heart thundered in my chest. Pain pressed hard against my ribs, but beneath it came a kind of clarity. This wasn't about a single dinner or even a text message. This had been a campaign of erasure, a long effort to reduce me to nothing more than a bank account that could one day be discarded. Daniel's eyes met mine. "I know I let it happen. I stood by while she spoke about you like that. I can't take it back, but I want to make it right." I held his gaze silent. Trust couldn't be rebuilt in a single afternoon. But for the first time, I saw not just a son asking for help, but a man facing his own blindness. The weeks that followed were quieter, almost tentative, like the hush after a storm, when you're not sure if the clouds are gone for good. Daniel came by often sometimes, with Emma clinging to his shirt, sometimes alone, his eyes heavy but clearer than before. He didn't ask for money anymore. Instead, he asked for time, an hour, to talk, a place to sit where he didn't feel judged. He had started seeing a therapist, he told me one afternoon, shifting nervously on the couch, as if embarrassed to admit it. He had also picked up weekend shifts at a hardware store to make ends meet. His pride stung, I could see it, but there was a steadiness in his voice that hadn't been there before. For the first time, he wasn't waiting for me to rescue him. He was learning how to hold himself up. Then came the letter from Madison's attorney. She wanted partial custody of Emma weekends in the house and control of the joint account Daniel had tried to protect. He brought the papers to me, his hands shaking. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his eyes darting to mine like a boy again. I stood, walked to the filing cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a business card. Sliding it across the table, I met his gaze. "Call her. She's a good lawyer. Fair, sharp, and not afraid of people like Madison." His brows furrowed. "Are you sure I'm sure I said? But I'm not paying for the case, Daniel. This is your battle. I'll help you find the right tools, but you'll have to fight with your own hands." He nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility settling on him. For once, there was no resentment in his eyes, only gratitude. Weeks later, he stood in court and held his ground. The judge granted joint custody, rejected Madison's financial demands. For the first time, Daniel walked out of a courtroom standing taller than he had in years. One evening, not long after the custody hearing, Emma fell asleep in the guest room at my house. I had tucked her in with a quilt I had stitched years ago, back when Daniel was still small enough to drag it through the hallways like a cape. She looked so much like him in those early years, her lashes resting against her cheeks, her little fists curled by her face, that for a moment, time folded in on itself. Grandma sang the song she had whispered as I smoothed her hair. And so I did. The same lullaby I once sang to Daniel on nights when he was afraid of the dark. My voice wavered at first, rusty from years of silence, but the melody found me again. Emma's breathing slowed, steady, and even until sleep carried her away. I stayed by her side longer than I needed to, listening to the rhythm of her tiny breaths. And in that quiet, I understood what all of this had been for. It wasn't about losing or winning or even about revenge. It was about drawing a line in the sand and waiting to see who would cross it with grace. Daniel had begun to. He visited often, never asking for anything except time. He told me about work, about therapy, about the small steps he was taking to rebuild a life that was his own. I didn't rush him. Trust was not a gift to hand over freely. It was something he had to earn piece by piece. Standing at the window that night, the moon high above the Oregon hills, I felt something settle in me. This story was never about being excluded from a dinner. It was about showing the next generation, my son, my granddaughter, what love really means. Love is firm, love is gentle, love has boundaries, and above all, love is something that must be respected if it's ever to last. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.